A classic American breakfast. You have oatmeal, maybe a huge Starbucks latte with like 30, 50 grams of sugar inside of there. You have people eating some eggs. Generally seems to be healthy, depends on who you pay attention to. Some people say it's the devil, some people say it's healthy, and a glass of orange juice. I'm actually curious from your point of view, is that actually a healthy way to start the day? And contrast that with, you were recently in Greece working on your next book. How do some of the world's longest living people start their morning off?
So first of all, let me take you back to my original exposure to the Mediterranean. This was long before people were talking about the Mediterranean diet. Okay, I had finished college. Before going to medical school, I was very interested in understanding food, culture, and health. And so I did a gap year. I went over to Italy to learn about food. It was my first exposure really to Europe way of life, in a place that eats Mediterranean cuisine, right? And culture. And then I went to Greece, which is a place I've come back to again and again. I'm fascinated by the elemental nature of the life in Greece. It's not fancy for the most part. It's very simple. And this has actually given me an insight into healthy approaches to food, because simplicity is actually something that seems to be a recurrent theme in people who live long and live well. And so, I love the fact that you brought up this idea of like the typical breakfast where, you're stacking the drive-through, and, we didn't even talk about like how you get your coffee, with a pumpkin flavor and all the whipped cream and your convection oven, ultra processed breakfast sandwich and all that other kind of stuff that, we see this all the time. I'll tell you what I've seen. I've seen in some of the healthiest people that come from the healthy cultures, they live pretty simple lives. A great example is the people I've known from Greece, for example. They start their breakfast with basically a simple cup of coffee and maybe a piece of fruit. And that's it. It's really, really simple. All right. And maybe some Greek yogurt. All right. And not a lot of it, like a little tiny cup of it with some crushed pistachios, maybe a little bit of cut fruit into it. And that's it. And I actually embarked upon that myself and found myself feeling so much better by not loading in calories and loading in additives and loading in all that other stuff. Listen, I grew up like most people who are probably watching or listening to this, hey, it's really great to have a big topping of whipped cream with like all these fancy things on it. Like it feels like holidays, but to be honest with you, simple has always made me feel better. I start the day with a cup of coffee. And by the way, coffee, as I have continued to conclude, it's one of the holy trinity beverages: water, tea, and coffee. No matter what field you're looking at, whether you're looking at cancer, whether you're looking at diabetes, whether you're looking at longevity, whether you're looking at overall fitness, coffee seems to be good for you. Okay. I was told in medical school, coffee is not that great for the heart. It could actually give you arrhythmias and there's too much caffeine in it. The bioactives in coffee, which you would find as a common denominator from Ethiopia, which is where we think coffee originally came from, to Greek coffee, which is actually Turkish coffee, is pretty loaded with caffeine. So you got to be careful about that. But it's also loaded with these polyphenols like chlorogenic acid. And chlorogenic acid does amazing things to your metabolism, to your blood vessels, to the lower inflammation, and just tip the odds in your favor towards longevity with a simple cup of coffee in the morning.
Is that usually what you have to start off the day?
Every day.
A cup of coffee.
A cup of coffee. The stronger, the better. Now, listen, this is me, all right? And personalized nutrition, I always say when I'm on a podcast, the most useful thing I can do is to tell you the facts, like science, or I can just tell you what I do. And for me, a really nice cup of coffee, straight up. I don't put cream. I don't put dairy. And I also don't even put nut milk or, any of those, or oat milk or anything else. And I like my coffee straight. Part of that came from the fact that when I spent time in Italy and Greece, I would just have like an espresso in the morning or a very strong coffee in the morning. And it's a pick-me-up. It does not break my intermittent fasting from the night before, because as long as you don't put any sugar or anything else in it, you're just soaring through. Your body, your metabolism is still powering through, burning harmful extra body fat overnight and continuing into the day. And it's not until you actually eat something with real calories in it, which could be could be piece of fruit or yogurt, any of these other things we talked about. But, so I do skip breakfast every now, but I like a simple cup of coffee as the anchor to how I start my day.
What about some of these other foods that you often see people eating here in the United States and contrasting those? Things like oatmeal, things like eggs, things like orange juice. What's your feeling on those?
You're asking the right question, but I really want to frame it. I'm not going to actually tell you, like oats are universally good or bad. Like that's the religion of food. For example, oatmeal, which is, basically cooked or steamed or boiled oats, actually contains a lot of bioactives from oats. And this is recent research I've done. We presented at medical conferences where we took whole oats, the kind you have in Aveeno skin cream and the kind you would have in oatmeal. We've extracted out the concentration of the bioactives. So what are the bioactives in oats? Well, one of them is called avenanthramide. Okay. The other one is beta-glucan, which is the same thing you'd find in mushrooms and barley. Two really potent substances. And we decided to do some medical research by testing what can these oat bioactives do. So people talk about inflammation and all that stuff. I'm a scientist, so I wanted to see it for myself. So we collaborated with a group out of the University of Arizona and a standard model to look at wound healing. Now, I have a background in biotech, and wound healing is a big problem in people with diabetes, in nursing homes, in the intensive care units. You got skin breakdown, bed sores. People with diabetes wind up having wounds in their feet that they get gangrenous and they have to get amputated. So one of my passions, but also areas of expertise is how can we support healing, wound healing faster, right? So we talk about healing, right? So, okay, oat bioactives, if you inject them into the wound, in the border of a wound, and this is a lab experiment, we were so surprised. It doubled the rate of healing. It zipped the wound shut. And then when we did the medical research to food as medicine research, we did a deep dive into the tissue that healed. And what we found? Oat bioactives completely suppressed inflammation. Bingo, box checked, proven. Okay, I saw it myself. Number one. Number two, it generated more healing blood vessels. That's my wheelhouse. Angiogenesis, how the body grows blood vessels. Oats can actually stimulate healing by nurturing those blood vessels that we need for healing and lowering inflammation. And then something that was surprising to us is that in the lab, when we did this, used extracted from oats, injected into a wound, doubled the healing. We also discovered that the wound that healed was scarless. And scarless healing is a holy grail for anybody, any surgeon, any medical device company, any pharmaceutical company. We'd never seen this before. And we wouldn't have discovered it if we didn't actually take what Mother Nature had, pull it out, and put it into a standard medical test system. This is what like people always, talk about food as medicine. I'm one of the dudes that actually does it. And so when we looked at it, how could you get scarless healing? I mean, like we looked under the microscope and this baby had this healed wound, had no scar, no inflammation, plenty of nourishing blood vessels, but it had no scar. When you actually looked at the collagen, and I know this is the topic that, you've also talked about, and we can talk about it some more about collagen. Collagen is normally in tissue. It's a beautiful woven pattern. If you've ever had a beautiful oriental rug or tapestry on your wall or your window, like that's weaving. And when collagen is woven perfectly, there's no scar. So we looked at this. There was no scar. The collagen was woven perfectly in the healed wound with more blood vessels and no inflammation. Okay. And then we took it one step further. We found that the oats bioactives recruited stem cells for healing. Okay. So I just took you through, like over a year worth of research, but I gave you the kind of the top line on this. So that changed my view towards oatmeal. Okay.
Did you have a negative view on it before? Or you had a more neutral?
I had a neutral view.
Okay.
Listen, I grew up, I remember my parents used to buy those prepackaged oatmeal envelopes.
Quaker Oats packets,
whatever
or whatever
the brand was, I can't remember. But, they had little dried fruit chips in it and they had flavoring and
sugar, all sorts of stuff.
God knows what else was in there. Okay. Because I wasn't paying attention when I was a kid.
Right.
Now I do. So I, like with my situationally aware approach to food, where I always tell everybody, please, if you're going to buy something in a box or in a package or a sealed envelope, look at the ingredient label. Like I do that now, but I look back and I'm like, you know what? I don't know how good that prepackaged stuff was for me because it was an ultra processed food. I didn't think about it that way. But so I had a little bit neutral to questioning, a little suspicious about this. But now I know oats by itself has some really powerful things that could be unlocked, which we've done. But back to the oatmeal. How do you, like oatmeal is an oatmeal. You could buy rolled oats, in a canister, and that's all there is to it. Please look at the ingredient label, which is what I do now. Now that I've made these research discoveries, I'm eating oatmeal every now and then. Not every single day, but
Sure.
Like if I had a choice, I'm going to make my own with just water. I still don't put dairy in it. And then, I'll take some dried fruits because I know there's other bioactives, dried cranberries to get the elagitannins and anthocyanins. I'll get all that stuff, or crushed nuts.
Right.
You get some dietary fiber, get some healthy monounsaturated fatty acids, good for my cholesterol. I'm trying to think about, this whole idea of how do you start your day? Back to the question you asked. How can one start one's day in the healthiest way possible? For me, cup of coffee, I don't adulterate it. I know what's in it. It's got chlorogenic acid. It's good for so many aspects of health and longevity. It adds to my quality of life. So that's part of my health span and lifespan. Coffee, by the way, slows down the rate of cellular aging as well. So that's been studied in people. Phenomenal. I don't think too much about it. I just get my cup of joe. But
you have it. You enjoy it.
But I enjoy it. Okay. And that's at the end of the day, the most important thing. I know that oatmeal with this research could be beneficial, but it depends on how you get it and what you put in it. And so, it's all in the details, right? So like the quality of the product that you're having. But enough for me, if I can get Greek yogurt, I might have it every now and then. I don't have it every day. Other than the coffee, there's probably no single thing that I do every single day because I love diversity. And, like in my books, I've written about 200 or 300 foods. I love to choose from them. It's kind of like I feel like I'm the kid in the candy shop of health every single day. From the time I wake up and the choices I make, I just have a lot of fun picking things that I love that are good for me.
I think that really the message of what you're sharing here is that it's not good and bad foods. Generally, when you're talking about whole foods, minimally processed, and actually it goes back to how processed is it? If it's super adulterated, you can take anything that actually could be a great food for you or a part of a healthy diet. If somebody is largely eating whole foods, getting their steps in, doing some resistance training, and they want some oatmeal, and that's their preferred way to get carbohydrates, and it's not filled with a ton of sugar. But even if they want to put a little bit of honey or maple syrup and they're putting nuts in and other stuff, they're going to be a healthy person, right? It's only when we rely heavily on these ultra processed forms in all areas of our life. You mentioned how coffee can be great for us. And there's some people out there that are drinking coffee and it's truly maybe 30 grams, 20 grams of sugar every single morning, day in and day out. And that's not the only thing that they're doing. There's food dyes in there. There's syrups. There's other stuff. And then that leads to the next thing. They might have 2 lattes in a day. Then there might be a lot of processed foods in the diet. So it's really about how we approach these things. That's what I'm hearing from you.
Well, and you're right. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. But one thing I want to do for anybody listening to this is to try to bring a little bit of discipline and clarity to this idea of the use of the word processed and ultra processed. Because I think we, those of us who talk about it all the time, we understand what we're trying to say. But I think for people who are listening, sometimes there's some confusion. What's what's processed versus ultra processed? And what I tell people is that we very rarely eat raw ingredients one at a time. Maybe an exception is a salad bar, or a fruit plate. You're eating every forkful is like one thing. A little thing of lettuce, a little tomato, a little watermelon or a pineapple. Most of the time, the foods that we eat, the food I enjoy, is cooked, prepared. Whether it's Chinese food, Indian food, Mexican food, Spanish food, Italian food, it's prepared. And that means that you're taking raw ingredients and doing something with it, which is processing it. So you ever see how they make homemade pasta? Get a big amount of flour, make a little hole in it like a volcano crater, crack a couple of eggs, and then just use your fingertips to start working it until it actually firms up, and then you roll it out. Okay, so that's like grandma in Italy making pasta the way it's been done for thousands of years.
Right.
That's processed. You're processing the food.
Minimally processed, a lot of people say.
Minimally processed, but the point is that like homemade, like that, with fresh ingredients, could be technically considered processed.
Sure.
But that's not what we're talking about when we talk about the foods that we should be more careful about. Now, there's so much discussion about the food industry. And I want to maybe touch on that just a little bit, but ultra processed foods are not the foods you make at home, like manipulate at home to cook and to turn into a meal. Those are the ones that are made in a big factory and where machines are extruding ingredients and converting ingredients into forms and shapes like animal crackers, for example, that wouldn't naturally occur in nature, and then add lots of chemicals to them, emulsifiers, preservatives, artificial coloring, artificial flavoring, added sugar. That's another one. Okay. And this is all transparently on the ingredient label, but hidden in plain sight to the consumer. And so ultra processed foods are a choice that many of us have been, I would say, conditioned to make, to reach for because of how we grew up in our society. Something out of a box that tastes really great and it's sweet and it's not very expensive. So maybe your mom bought a lot of it and it's in your pantry, maybe for months and months and months. Like food it's not supposed to last that long. Okay. And it's all engineered for convenience, shelf life, longer it lasts, better is for consumers, so to speak. That's what they make us believe, or certainly for the grocery store. And it's cheap and it's available. Right. And then it's engineered to really make you crave it. Right. So I don't call it a conspiracy. Companies do what companies do. That's what they're trying to do. Their job is to create stuff, for their shareholders who are actually counting on them to create stuff. The responsibility comes to us as consumers to make those healthy choices. Right. I mean, look, you get in a car every day and you drive to your work or whatever. Up to you if you're going to actually speed and endanger yourself and other people, or you're going to drive in the speed limit. And so these are choices we make. We make good choices and we can make bad choices. But if every day you choose to make a choice that puts you in danger, okay, and I think that's really where this modern sensibility is like all this stuff that we just thought was our lives. Ultra processed foods. There's a danger element to them. I think we're beginning to wake up as a society to ask questions about that. And at the end of the day, it's up to us to make those good choices.
I'd love to get your perspective on this. I was recently in Japan for the first time visiting. My wife had been there a couple of times. And in reading a little bit about it, one of the things that you see in contrast is that Japan as a society, which also plays into this idea of your Mediterranean diet, right? That you talked about last time you were on the podcast. Their population has, I think, like a 3% obesity rate compared to in America, we're like just right around or a little bit above the 50% like obesity, right? And then if you talk about overweight, we're dealing with a population that's in the 75 plus category, maybe even 80%. I'll have to pull those statistics. And one of the things that they do in their country, when you look at the country of Japan, is on a national level, they really talk about healthy eating habits from a young age. And in fact, many of the schools are mandated to have a nutritionist at the school, and that meals they're mandated to be made from scratch each day for the kids in that school. And at the youngest of ages, it depends on the school district and where it is and what part of the country and what resources, but kids are often involved in the making of the process, washing foods, other things. So I think sometimes when people feel that there's something going on in America, they hear from organizations like the Eat Real nonprofit and that's in the Bay Area, where they see that one of the trickery that sometimes happens is that you have an aggressive sort of food industrial complex that will lobby that they will come in with the cheapest prices into schools, and they end up getting the kitchens sort of shut down, not by direct pressure, but because the schools don't need a kitchen. And now the schools that actually have interest in making healthy food, they don't even have a kitchen in the first place, and they can't even compete. So it's not that it's one person's fault, but it's almost like a de facto plan of like, how do we have it so backwards over here when it comes to teaching our young kids? And then there's things like, what if it was the Farm Bill or something where pizza is considered a vegetable, right? And so that meets the requirements for a lot of schools. So that's where I think that some people feel like, is corporate pressure from just the idea of maximizing profit from every different direction, is that sort of unintentionally, intentionally squeezing us so that from a young age, we have kids that develop these just incredibly unhealthy habits?
Yeah, I mean, look, health starts when you're young, right? So the moment you're born, you're becoming exposed to the environment. Your epigenetics are starting to change. Your genetics are firing up. Your health defenses that you're born with, that formed in your mom's womb when you take your first breath, take your first suckle of hopefully breast milk and not formula. You're being exposed to the environment. It's like we're out. I've been using the analogy. When we are born, we are all like laptops, brand new laptops you take out of the box. It's perfectly designed. They all look the same. You plug it into the wall. When you start it up, the operating system is supposed to work exactly the same way. Okay. And yes, there are some genetic differences, of course, but lifestyle winds up being, 80% or more dictating our fate. And our fate starts when we were young. So a lot of these early exposures that we actually have wind up not only developing habits, but also developing cellular fingerprints that we carry with us to the decades that we wind up living. Now, the good news, it's never too late to actually revert back to your own operating system, which is this is why I tell people, if you're somebody who hasn't really paid attention to your health for most of your life and you feel kind of crummy and you're like, you know what, it's time to own up to this and I want to actually change myself. I want to do something. How do I do it? Which diet do I take? What supplement should I take? What should I cut out of my life? I mean, that's a typical thing that I often hear from somebody who's desperate to improve their situation and they're overwhelmed, especially in today's world. And then of course they invoke like, oh, is there a big conspiracy around me and I'm trapped in I'm trapped in somebody else's nightmare. You know what? What I say is that it's a very complex situation, health and food. All right. And you addressed you started to address some of the nuances and complexities. What I say is that what you got to realize is that we all have it hardwired in ourselves to be able to have that operating system to get back to health. Our metabolism knows how to actually be healthy. We know how to lose body fat. We know how to actually regulate blood sugar for the most part. We know how to actually keep our joints healthy. We know how to keep our brains healthy. That's actually what comes out of the box. That's our operating system. Now, over the course of many years, we derail our operating system. It's like your laptop. You keep it too hot, you drop it, you download crazy things on it. It's got some viruses on it. Listen, you might keep your computer, your laptop in perfect shape. If I'm careless and I drop it and I do all those crazy things to it, I don't have any kind of hygiene on it. At some point, I'm going to regret it. I'm going to say, you know what? My laptop's running really slowly. I got all these viruses. My screen doesn't work so well. What can I do? I feel overwhelmed. And what I always tell people, like in your body, go back to basics, clean it up, go back to the operating system, all right, and start from there. And so simple things can actually get us back. And yes, there are lots of overwhelming considerations. If you are overwhelmed by messaging, that's not corporations. Well, maybe it's a media corporation, but listen, it's up to you what you're listening to, what you're scrolling through. If you're overwhelmed by advertising on television or a billboard sign, as they used to be, hey, listen, we're supposed to, we're supposed to be smart enough, especially as we get older, to make our own choices on these things. You can't tell people not to advertise. You could try to, but at the end of the day, I always feel take responsibility, go back to your own operating system, do some simple things that can make a big difference. You can't fight the machine. Okay. Machine can be taken down by another machine to take it apart, try to put it back together. I think, in our society, and not just the United States, but I think around the world, we're seeing this in action. The old machine is being challenged by the people who are saying, should we take it apart and put it back together again? Sometimes you got to do that. If you're somebody who is really good with your hands and tools, sometimes you just got to take that lawnmower apart.
Yeah.
Okay. And put it back together and clean all the pieces. I think that's kind of what we're going through with the society, and food is no different. I think that some of those questions that are being asked, should we be having these additives? Should we be having these dyes? Should we be having these preservatives? I think they're really valid questions. We don't know the answers to some of the suspicions in full detail, but listen, I'm a medical doctor. And when I took my oath at the end of medical school to become a doctor, you get all these young guns, with their stethoscope through. We have to take the Hippocratic Oath. And along the way, we really are pledged to the concept of first do no harm. And I think when you go to Japan, when you go to Europe, when you go to many other countries, that's their first principle as well. We don't know what the harm is. Let's not subject our people to it. And so there's a little bit more of a let's protect our people first, as opposed to let's make money first.
Sure, totally. An important message. We have to have personal responsibility because at the end of the day, for our own situation, it has to be us realizing we have agency and start to make decisions in the right direction. It's the law of responsibility. If it's somebody else's fault completely, not that they didn't play a role in it, then you are a victim. You can't change anything about it. But if it was a little bit our fault too, then we can do something about it. And that's an important reminder for all of us. And along with it, as people get healthy, as a lot of people are listening today, they do care about what can I do to make the world a better place? First, always is be an example, share education. If you like this podcast, your books, other things that people come across, share it with people. Donate that book to a local library, start a book club, maybe start a garden, whatever it might be. Be involved in some advocacy, Those things also can play a role in it too. But I love the message of personal responsibility, and it's one that I live by in my own life as well. I want to come back to this idea that you're thinking about a lot about right now, which is your approach to this world of longevity. And I think that a great way to set up this conversation is when you're spending time in Greece and Europe and some of these other places in Asia where you have these pockets of individuals who not only live a long life, lifespan-wise, as is related to, what's possible for human beings. That could be a high concentration of centenarians or whatever. But even for the individuals that get, let's say, quote unquote, only to 80 or 85 or 90, they're generally a lot healthier than people that we see as the average population here in the United States, for example. What are some of the things that they are or aren't doing that sometimes people are confused about? Maybe we call this myths around longevity.
Yeah.
So what can you share with our audience when it comes to this topic?
That's a big one to unpack. And I'm in the middle of doing the research on it, is sort of to say, what are we learning new about longevity that hasn't already been covered or isn't really well worked out? And what are some of the things that people believe about longevity that may not be entirely the way it actually is? So a couple things. And I think that, I'm a real practical guy. I'm a pragmatist. So I like to explain things in ways that are easy to understand. So first of all, we all want to live as long as we possibly can. And to me, longevity is living as long as you're possibly able to, but as well, and having a good quality of life along the way, right? So everybody wants to live as long as they can, but you don't want to be living to whatever crazy numbers that people are spouting, 150, 200, 300 years old. You hear these numbers from the sort of the people who are ultra biohackers who are, really dreaming of super longevity, right? Like I've even heard the term, I think Peter Diamandis said this, escape velocity of aging. How do you escape? So you're just going to live forever. And I think that's an intriguing idea, but I think it misses the point of our humanity. We all just want to, if all you do is focus on the horizon, that distant point, and you don't focus on what is in front of your headlights, you're really going to be missing a lot of your life, especially, and maybe giving yourself a false promise if you just actually give a part. So some of the myths are like, for example, that your genetics determine everything about whether you're going to live long or not. It is true if your grandfather or great-grandfather, your family members lived a long time, you're probably going to have a better chance, hopefully with better genetics, to drive your vehicle for a longer period of time, the vehicle being your body. My great uncle, for example, lived to 104 years old, completely intact and cognitively clear. I don't know. I hope I got something from him.
Was he here in the States? Or was
He lived in
somewhere else?
China.
Okay.
Drank green tea, probably 6 to 10 cups of green tea every single day of his life. And he was very physically active, and he was really plugged into his community, had a big support. He kept his mind really active. And so, these are again, recurrent themes of people who live a really long time.
Could I interrupt you for
Yeah.
1 second? You're such on a roll, but I'm so fascinated about your uncle.
Yeah.
Obviously, everybody's individual situation is different, but from your research end, from your food end, and obviously he was a family member, if you had to rank, obviously genetics play a little bit, as you mentioned, they're not everything. If you had to rank the things that he was doing that probably played the biggest role in his long, but more importantly, healthy lifespan, even for somebody to live to 80 in America, but not be on prescription drugs and be healthy and their brain is sharp. That's even super rare. And meanwhile, your uncle, great uncle, is living to 104. What do you think were the biggest things that played a role?
You know what? I actually asked him this.
Yeah.
I asked him this because I went to his 100th birthday,
Wow.
which he planned. He made the guest list. He selected the food. All right. And he hosted, like, as the talkative host. All right. It was an amazing event for me. The first time I had ever personally known somebody, in this case, a family member, who turned 100, and I could see what it could be like.
Mm.
And so before we actually got to the actual birthday party, I arrived a little bit early, and this was in China. And I talked to him, and I'm like, okay, you got to tell me right here, right now, like, what is your secret? Like, and when you look back, what insights could you share? And I think the answer is pretty typical. He basically said, I don't know if there's a stock answer I can give you that's going to work for everyone, but I'll tell you. But he told me, here's what was important for me if I had to look back at it. He said, number one, I let things roll off my shoulder. I don't carry my anger. I don't carry resentment. Things are just not that important for me to actually kind of get too wrapped up in it, no matter what it is. And he's always been that way.
So the mindset first, right? Mindset, psychology.
Lower stress, and I think there's a little bit of self-care in there. Like, he would rather pay attention to things that he cares about rather than what other people care about, and he let a lot of things. And he specifically talking about anger. He's like, let the anger roll off. It's not a big deal. It's not worth it. Okay. And I still to this day remember that whenever I get into a situation where I get riled up, I'm like, maybe it's not that important. Okay. And that's just been helpful to me. So mindset, absolutely. The second thing he said is he's like, he lived at the base of this mountain that grew tea. And he said, I drink tea my whole life. He's like, I grew up in this house my whole life. I've been drinking green tea that is fresh from the mountain, freshly picked, seasonally picked. He's like, I know all the people who, in all the places that were picking the tea. And he's like, and I just drink it, sip it all day long. And he was a big believer in drinking green tea. And of course, the scientific evidence has shown the catechins, the polyphenols in green tea actually, and if you get dietary fiber, if you have the powdered tea like the matcha, if you actually have catechins from regular tea earlier in the season, you don't have as much caffeine because caffeine is developed by the tea plant as its own insecticide, natural pesticide. Early in the season, there are not that many bugs around, so the caffeine is very low. But he would just sip tea all day long. And the third thing he told me, was that he had to walk to the tea temple kind of place where he would sit with his friends every day. He had to walk and exercise to get to his tea. And those three things, mindset, trying to be a little chill, a lot of green tea over many decades, and then exercising. And then he's hanging out with buddies, that classic idea you see, like these old guys hanging around, playing chess or whatever it is they were doing, or just having conversation, or just sitting around and looking. I remember there was, because I went up with him one morning. I got up at 4 a.m. and I walked with him because I wanted to see what it was like. I want to walk in the shoes of this guy who's about to turn 100 and see what he does, to see if I could imagine myself doing that. So we walked up these stone steps. I mean, listen, the dude was like 99 plus, right? This was just a few days short of 100. And he was walking up uneven stone stairs, and probably the same way that people in Sardinia, in Ikaria, Greece, maybe in Okinawa, in these old cultures where people are living really well. And I was having a chat with him the whole time, and it was social, exercise, diet with green tea in his case, and mindfulness. Actually, if you really bring it back down to the things that you hear everybody saying, what's the common denominator? Take care of your mind. Don't get hung up on things. Take care of yourself. Eat in healthy ways. Choose your weapon of health, not weapon of destruction, weapon of health. It's going to be your health defense that you're activating your body. Be social. Exercise.
Yeah. And there's probably a lot of things within that he also wasn't doing. For example, like my guess is, not knowing your great uncle, but he probably maintained a healthy body weight throughout his life, which is a part of it.
Yep.
And obviously these habits and things like
contribute to
green tea and other things like that contribute to that and help support the natural metabolism that we all have. He's not having ultra processed foods on a regular basis.
By the way, I do remember another thing he told me on a previous visit that I had with him before his 100th birthday. And I can't remember how old he was at the time, but I was so curious and I think we should all do this more if we're fortunate to be able to have elders in our family or our community that we can actually speak to, just to get the wisdom of experience and age. I think that we're so focused on ourselves in here now. Like, I think there's a lot to be gained from talking to other people, just as examples, good and bad, right?
One of my favorite things to do.
But when I do remember another sort of deep piece of advice he gave me, he always said, live a life of moderation, be moderate, even with moderation. And what he did is he say, don't be excessive all the time, but every now and then give yourself a chance to blow it out and do the things that you want to do, not moderately. And so, like I always thought, wow, that's a pretty deep thing. Like, be reasonable most of the time, but every now and then give yourself the freedom to go do something that's a little extreme. And so anytime I want to do something extreme, I remember what my family member advised me.
What's the sidebar before we get back to longevity and that, great role that you were on? What's something extreme in Dr. Lee's world?
Oh, you know what? I love to explore new foods.
Yeah.
So sometimes I will just go, so most of the travel you're talking about to Italy or Greece or Japan or whatever, I'm researching. I'm actively researching, and I'm going to markets. I'm going to restaurants. I'm talking to people. I'm trying to find out something new, and I listen to people. So if somebody I meet in the Mediterranean encourages me to try a food, and it might have some animal fat in it, it might not look so healthy, but they really want me to try it because they're really proud of it, and they think that this is something that's important for me to know about as I research it. I'll sit down and try it, and I'll feel like I'm walking on the ledge a little bit, because it doesn't look that healthy. And you know what? It's part of my experience. I'll get to sample it. I might not eat it again, but then I've actually tried something new. So I'm never afraid to try a new experience that can give me a better insight into the world, but also into myself and how I react to it.
Yeah, that's an important philosophy. So it may be hard to get back on track because I threw you off by asking about your uncle, but I had to because that just sounded so fascinating. But you were talking about some of the myths that people think, and some people think it's genetics. Some people think that, it's really that one day we're going to find a magic pill that everybody could take, which I want to say that I do appreciate some of these, what I call longevity explorers. I don't think it's how we all need to necessarily live our life, but I appreciate anybody in any category that's like looking for the extreme of something, because who knows what benefit might come to society.
Yeah.
For that, do you agree with that?
Yeah,
generally?
no, totally. I mean, listen, I think that these explorers that are biohacking and trying supplements, inventing their own formulation, or doing like real bench research to figure these things out and then trying it for themselves, they are the modern day kind of pioneers. Like, not everyone's going to be right. Not everyone's going to, and some people are going to meet a untimely fate that they didn't expect. That's all part of exploration. I think that's the great, one of the themes that I keep coming back to, particularly, I'm writing my next book. I'm writing about a theme that will be very much involved with longevity. One thing that keeps on coming up is humanity. We don't want to be inhuman. We want to and live forever. We want to be more human. We want to actually be in touch with who we are as humans, as flawed as humans actually are. There's a lot of shortcomings that I think we have as human beings, but the courage to explore. is one of those wonderful things. So let's talk a little about myths. Genetics being a myth. I do think that the search for a magic supplement. I gave a talk recently, a keynote recently at a big conference of futurists and with a theme of longevity. And I started out by saying that, it's pretty cool that we have actually arrived at a time where we could even consider a legitimate quest to find ways to live longer. I think that's the science is there. I'm a scientist. I get excited by where science is pile driving progress forward. All right. But it's not a new quest. In fact, the quest for longevity, immortality is what it used to be called, is one of the oldest quests of humans. Okay, starting way back. And so I think about, and I gave this example of the first emperor of China, okay, who sent his people, ambassadors, on this expedition to find the magic ampule with that liquid powder. Like, he sent them to all these different islands to look for something that he could have that would make him immortal, right? And this has been the theme of many myths and movies and books, and it's mythological. Never found it, obviously, and the guy died, but as he recognized his mortality, his failed effort, what he did? He built the 10,000 terracotta warriors to look over his tomb. That was his solution at the time to immortality. All right. Now, fast forward, but if you look at Renaissance paintings, you see the Fountain of Youth, and you find all these other stories about what we as humans have been trying to do to look for that magic potion, magic pill, magic fountain to really help us live long and maybe forever. I think things changed in the modern day when Google formed Calico, the company Calico, whose mission was to conquer death. All of a sudden, you have capitalism, you've got investors, you've got people who are seriously going to try to tackle this seemingly impossible topic. And I think that brought us in a way into the modern age to say, what, maybe we can actually try to take a crack at this, right? So fast forward even more, and you've got the hallmarks of aging that, I know you've had other people on the show talking about, the mitochondria, the autophagy, the inflammaging, the gut, all these NAD, rapamycin, all these really important bricks that are being built up to help us better understand what's going on with aging, what's not going well with aging, and how might we build it back up. It's like cancer research back in the 1930s. We're just starting to see the path of man. It took a long time for us to be able to get to immunotherapy today, and we're still not where we want to be. So this is a long journey that we're actually on. But the myth is that we can still find, and it's so tempting to go back to that ancient quest. We still want to find that magic supplement. All right. And that's one of the things I would caution anybody is that there is no magic supplement. I don't care who it is that's going to solve that problem. And if you just think buying a supplement, subscribing to a refill of your supplement, and that's going to do it, not going to do it. All right. It might be part of the solution. It might be supportive, but it's not the only thing. And along the same lines, I would say another myth is that, if you just follow longevity hacks, it's going to solve your problems. All right. And those longevity hacks are, in a kinder, gentler way. Like, if you don't want to use the word hack, a lot of it is actually about being mindful, thinking about what you're doing, being purposeful about what you're doing.
What's an example of some of those, just so that
getting enough sleep, sleeping at the right temperature. You don't want to be sleeping in a super warm temperature, and you want to try to get, 7 to 9 hours of sleep, 8 hours being a magic window. This idea of caloric restriction. Hey, don't be a glutton. All right. Don't overload your body with calories, and choose wisely whatever it is you're loading in. That's fuel. Fasting, or intermittent fasting. One of the most natural things that we do. When you're sleeping, you're not eating. When you're not eating, you're fasting, and you're not sleeping all the time. You're going to sleep and waking up. So you're intermittently fasting all night. So a lot of these sort of like trendy topics that wind up being hacks for longevity actually are things that are pretty reasonable to do, fairly straightforward. And I encourage people, again, I welcome and I respect. In some cases, I admire people who are these pioneers of longevity and anti-aging. I think it's really cool that there are people that are doing that kind of thing. Me, I'm a researcher. I know what I'm working on, but I also, in trying to help educate people, right? Like if you know something, tell somebody else something that can be helpful. I try to get people who don't have the capacity or the money to go buy all these things for themselves and who get stressed out hearing about how you got to monitor your glucose every single hour. It stresses them out. And I basically say, listen, you know what? Those things matter, but they don't matter enough for you to get like wound up about it. And they're pretty common sense. And so many of the hallmarks of aging fit with some basic mindfulness principles that anybody can actually manage. And so I sort of take down that I think you can be ambitious if you want to actually aim towards living a long and good life and healthy life without actually having to jack yourself up in terms of like, oh man, do I have enough money to afford this? Do I have enough time to deal with this? Listen, if you're super stressed out all the time because you can't fit another 10 biohacks into your day when you've got your job, your family, your mortgage and everything else to deal with, that's not going to take away as opposed to add.
Sure. It kind of goes back to your great uncle's message of like simplicity and how you started off this podcast. So on that theme, because you are in that, there are people that live longer and healthier than the average population here in North America. So what are some of those things that you found that make the biggest difference with that?
So what's really interesting for me is, as somebody who's a scientist and can tinker in the lab, as I have, but also as a food as medicine researcher, where I believe the other end of the equation as a doctor and as an observer is equally important, is to study what's happening in people who actually have lived a long time. All right. What can we learn from them? Is there some clue? We talked a little bit about the advice my uncle gave when I probed him for it. But objectively, as a researcher, as a scientist, what can we find that is a standout in people who live a long time? Not subjective, but objective. All right. And this is an area of interest that I think is so fascinating. 15 years ago, if you were to talk about gut health, so a few people might have recognized it, but we didn't really have even the tools that were affordable to be able to study gut microbiome or gut health at scale, healthy gut bacteria. The 39 trillion bacteria that we know live inside our gut that actually help control inflammation, help control our metabolism, help signal to our brain, the whole gut-brain axis that I know you've talked about on the show, but now we have it. And because we have it, we're able to apply the measurement of the gut microbiome not just to people in their 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s, but we can apply this same research tool, diagnostic tool, exploration tool to people who live a long time to ask the very simple question. And this is just an example of the research that I've been fascinated by. People who live a long time, what's different about their gut microbiome? We know it's so important. It's the tip of the iceberg, but is there something we can just jump ahead and look at people who are 100 or even older to find out what's different about their gut? All right. This is looking for hypotheses, looking for observations, and we've discovered something. And this is amazing. All right. So there's a group in Italy, in Bologna, who gathered people into a study that ranged across adult life from 20s to 40s to 60s to 70s to 90s to 100s to 114. Super agers. All right. Super centenarians, as I call it. Okay. So we all think about somebody who lived to 100. Like I brought my uncle up, like, oh man, that's really cool. Probably pretty rare to be able to get there. I don't know too many people who live to 100, but do you know how many centenarians there are on the planet today? Take a guess.
I don't know. If I had a guess. Okay. So the population globally is 8-point-something billion, right? Around there. My guess is that there's probably, I would say that there's probably 0.5% of the population, 0.3%, maybe 0.2%. So I'm not going to do public math here, but let me just estimate from a gut feeling. I don't know. Are there like 200,000?
There are, as of now, this year, an estimated 722,000 centenarians on Earth. Almost 750,000 people are 100 years or older. So this is not a long shot. This is something that is happening on a planetary level more commonly than we thought. And the reason that I bring that up is because a lot of people will be surprised to hear how many people actually live to 100 every single year. All right. Which is good news, right? I mean, it says something that, is with all the crap that we're afraid of, the climate, the pollution, the toxins, all these things that, are very appropriately, should be front and center for what we're thinking about when it comes to policy and elections and, the decisions that we make for our families and ourselves. Totally appropriate. But it just goes to show you, in spite of that, humans are actually starting to live longer. And there's a lot of people who are doing that. Okay, so let me tell you about this research study, because they gathered a bunch of people who are actually 100 and older as part of this big cohort. And they studied their gut microbiome using standard tools that we have available today that are affordable. So again, 15 years ago, maybe a few people could know it, but super expensive and didn't have that knowledge base. Now they've applied it. And the question that this study asked was, what are the standout bacteria across people who are living at different age groups? And then when you go to the centenarians and older, are there any bacteria that pop out that go, oh my gosh, these bacteria are so high in these people, there must be something going on with these bacteria? And the answer is there's 4 bacteria in the super agers.
Wow.
100 and above. All right. So I consider this kind of like breakthrough discovery. Like my whole career as a researcher has not been to follow other people, but to really look on the horizon for, like if you're in the old days, you think about those big sailing ships.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're in the crow's nest with the periscope and the parrot on your shoulder, all right, what do? You go like land ho, right? Like that's the discovery. I think I see something. So this research, I think, has seen land ho in the gut microbiome of super agers. And there's 4 bacteria that's happening. You want to know what they are?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. I know you'll have heard of one of them, but 3 of them I bet you haven't heard of. All right. One of them is called Odoribacter. Okay, Odori bacter, Odoribacter. All right. A second one is called Oscillobacter, like oscillation. Third one is called Christenella. Okay, another bacteria. Now, if you haven't heard about this, and I know you're actually pretty you're pretty seasoned when it's talking to about microbiome, right? Now, even for me, I hadn't really heard about these, and I spent some time, like a decade, looking at microbiome. I hadn't even heard of these. Okay, 4th one, Akkermansia. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
4 bacteria, including one, like our old friend Akkermansia, that I know I've talked to you on the show before.
Yeah.
They are the standout bacteria in people who get to be 100 and much older, the super agers. Okay, so what do? All right, let's pounce on those 4 bacteria. What did they do? Well, we don't know everything they do, but we do know that some of them, like the Odoribacter, improves your immune system against E. coli, against other bacteria that might take you out as you get older. Okay. It boosts your immune system. It defends you against bacteria and viruses and probably cancer as well. But we don't know that. Like, again, this is all discovery. We're putting together a picture. Cool. We got a bacteria that boosts your immune system. Another one, like the Oscillobacter, helps improve your blood lipid profile. It's like Mother Nature's statin actually lowers your LDL, your bad cholesterol, helps to improve your HDL cholesterol, lowers overall cholesterol. Pretty cool. All right. That starts to make sense. Also helps your metabolism, your blood sugars become more even out. How? Insulin sensitivity makes your body more insulin sensitive. All right. Doesn't mean that, it's going to help you if you're pounding sugar and sodas into your body all the time. But let's talk about people that are making it and living, a reasonably healthy life. That bacteria could make a big difference, right? Other bacteria improve cardiovascular health. And of course, Akkermansia, we know, does a whole host of things for lowering inflammation, improving metabolic health, helping you to fight off cancer, even showing like it actually plays a role probably in brain health and cognition, protecting cognition as well as some of the latest research on it. Okay, so that's pretty cool. You got 4 players that have been newly discovered that all do things to your body's systems that help us live healthy, live long, live healthy, live long and prosper, right? That old swap thing. Hey, if our gut microbiome is important for our health when we're adults, what about when we're elderly? We're beginning to ask that question. This is the new conversation that's actually happening in longevity research. Okay. And then the coolest part, and this is what I'm working on, what are the foods you can eat that can actually support that? I'm not going to go like bacteria by bacteria, but I'll just tell you collectively.
Sure.
So give you an idea. If you're interested in grooming, cultivating, raising these bacteria in your body, this is what I'm finding out so far. So remember, Odorobacter, Oscillobacter, Cristianicella, and Akkermansia. All right. Akkermansia we know, right? We've talked about this before. Pomegranates, dried cranberries, Concord grape, the juice or the whole thing. There's some more players. Chili peppers can actually do it as well. Black raspberries can do it. If you've ever been to dim sum, where they steam their soup dumplings, it's like a treat. It's like these steam wrappers and a little bit of filling and like a big bite of soup that comes out. Absolutely delicious. Guess what? The vinegar that they serve in those restaurants, along with those soup dumplings, is Chinese black vinegar, Sichuan vinegar. That vinegar grows Akkermansia in the body. Pretty cool, right?
Wow.
So I've talked about salsa, spicy, about dim sum, all right? Pomegranate, think about all the Middle Eastern cultures that actually have used pomegranate in their cooking. Cranberries, Turkey Day cranberry, all right? There's healthy ways of actually doing that too. So again, these are achievable ways to actually cultivate this one bacteria, which, by the way, if you have it and you have cancer and you're getting immunotherapy, this one bacteria, Akkermansia eosinophila, has been shown in human studies to be critical for helping you respond to the cancer treatment. So this is not like a maybe I wonder if I should. This could wind up becoming a life and death decision. Mm-hmm. And this is like the kind of research I do as a medical doctor. I'm not just sort of like a kale wheat leaf waiver saying, oh, like on a good day, eat some more veggies. Like this is the stuff that I do as a cancer researcher as well. Like what could we advise patients to do when they are asking their oncologist or oncology nurse, what should I eat? And the answer that's often given is like, I don't know, or it doesn't really matter what you eat. It does matter what you eat. By the way, when it comes to cancer, if you want to live long, there's all kinds of things that you can actually do. But one of the things I think that we should be focusing on that is going to be very, very effective as the science for extending life being worked out is to curtail or avoid the things that will take you out early. Cancer being one of them. Yeah. Diabetes, one of them. Obesity being another one. Akkermansia. Other foods, by the way, that actually answer resistant starches. Plantains.
For Akkermansia or all these bacteria?
For these other bacteria.
Yeah.
Okay. Resistant starches. Day-old rice. Cook rice, steam rice, put it in the fridge, have it the next day. You've turned steam rice, fresh rice, which is a starch, into a resistant starch. All right. Potato. Going to roast a potato. All right. If you roast it healthily, if you don't eat it all, stick your leftovers in the fridge. Guess what? That temperature changes the chemistry of the starch. The next day when you have it, even if you heat it up again, resistant starch, that grows some of these four players. These are like the four horsemen of longevity that we think we may be onto. Again, this is not a conclusion. This is an observation.
Sure.
But an exciting one.
Very
resistant starches. All right. Oatmeal also, has some ability to grow some of these bacteria as well. So again, you sort of, we're starting to reverse engineer. What can we learn from people who are super old that are in good health? What's in their body that's a standout? Gut microbiome, it's the undiscovered country. Now we're beginning to just carve into it a little bit to figure out what's there. Now let's back it up. If those are important, are there foods that we can actually eat? Because as you pointed out, these are the early patterns. Like you can't be, sick when you're 70 and say, oh man, now I'm going to go back and start to grow these things all of a sudden. You should start living a healthier life, but these are patterns that actually probably support your overall health from the time when you're not thinking about your health.
Follow-up question on this, which is obviously super fascinating. One of the things that we learned from you is Akkermansia, which you've talked about before on the podcast numerous of times, is not just a small strain, but it's a pillar strain. In a healthy gut, it should make up, I think you said last time, about 5% of the total sort of bacteria.
A little bit less.
Okay, so around there. So 3-4%, somewhere around there. But anyways, it's more than like a percentage point. And there's probably not that many bacteria that make up that volume, right? Because if you have 100% and Akkermansia is somewhere between 2 and 5%, there's only so many bacteria that are like that. Do you know for these other bacteria that you mentioned, were they able to find how plentiful they were? Were they also a large percentage in the gut?
Or they don't know yet? Don't know that. And that's, like you're asking the questions that the researchers are asking as well, including myself. All right, let's dig a little bit further. What is their prevalence? How common are they? What else do they do? Where do they grow? Like maybe they're not all in the usual place that gut microbiome. We need to figure out other places they grow. Are they environmentally influenced? Maybe smoking actually affects it. And if you don't smoke, maybe certain foods, fermented foods might affect it. So there's so many questions that get asked. This is the bread and butter of scientists, and I'm an honest scientist, and you can tell when you talk to a real scientist when the scientist says, I don't know the answer to your question, but they're really, really good questions. And are they affected by stress management? Are they affected by sleep? Are they affected by exercise? Right? These are all things. The other thing that I think I'm really excited by is new discoveries that I think can lend to this idea that we can live well as we live long. So we know that exercise is pretty central, pretty fundamental to being able to extend your life as long as you possibly go in healthy. Extend your health span, you want to exercise on a regular basis, right? But have you heard of the hope molecule?
No, I haven't.
All right. So the hope molecule is a relatively new discovery that when you exercise, your muscle, it comes from the muscle. When your muscles contract, it releases hope molecules, HOPE, hope. What are the hope molecules? Well, they're things that when you exercise, your muscle contracts, it goes into your bloodstream, goes to your brain, and it makes you feel hopeful and optimistic. You ever feel like after you exercise, you work out, just feel pretty good?
All the time,
right?
All the time.
Hope molecules contribute to that. Not the only thing, but contribute to that. All right. What is a hope molecule? All right. It's called a myokine. Myo as in muscle, kine like cytokine. It's a natural chemical that's released by muscle during exercise, kind of like the cytokine of the muscle, but it has a brain signaling property that we didn't realize. And you see, the reason that that's so important is not only does it actually connect the gut brain, muscle brain, all right? And that's actually really important because we tell people to exercise. Some people go, I never exercise. I can't do that. Hey, you know what? We're making these discoveries that show that you can actually influence your mindset by exercise. Did you know that, again, you're hardwired, your body's hardwired to create these hope molecules? Who wouldn't want that, right? So again, these are new discoveries that I think add layers of richness to what's already been discovered and will continue to be discovered in a lab on the building blocks of aging and how to actually counter aging. Let's also add to that what can we do for a lifestyle that can affect our gut, that can affect our mind, that can affect our muscle. Let's make some sense out of some of these recommendations that are there, so that when my great uncle told me, he walks up, he hugs up to the tea temple to be with his buddies to drink tea. Now I'm thinking, all right, he's getting his muscles working and they're releasing hope molecules that actually influence his brain. And now he's socializing in a more positive way with his friends. And we know social interaction is something that Dan Buettner from the Blue Zones has talked about, so important for these countries where people live long. They're with other people, And by the way, I think that is something that we need to really contend with as a society. And I don't know if it's a policy issue, but it's certainly a public health issue, is loneliness. No good if you're living to whatever age you want to live to, but you're doing it alone, isolated. And so how do we address that? How do we hack that? What can we do with that? I don't have the answer to that, by the way. I'm just bringing it up as something that in this wide-ranging conversation we're having about longevity and we're sort of covering this gray space that a lot of the pioneers haven't yet covered. But this is the area that I'm working in. I think it's really an amazing area to be able to flesh out for people the things that anchor them to their humanity as they get more years.
So when you look at movement and the brain muscle connection that you just talked about, the hope molecules. What's your thoughts on some of the longest living groups that are out there? These 700,000 centenarians worldwide that are there, and maybe discounted by a couple of percentage points because some of them were probably going to be genetic outliers in America who are living long, but they're not very healthy, or they've lost their sort of ability because of dementia, their cognitive ability. But for those people that are aging healthy and are living a long life, do you generally see that those individuals are compare their activity levels to the activity of, Americans, like modern day sort of average person, which we know that just going by one measure, step count, a lot of people are getting 4,000 or 5,000 steps or less in a day, which actually I was surprised to find, or not surprised to find, that I think even the CDC says that is the definition of being sedentary as one measure of things. So how would you look at, how are these people, how are your uncle, how are they getting that regular boost of that hope molecule? What's their activity level?
It's really hard to do comparisons because, we are kind of looking in the rearview mirror when we are thinking about where we've come from as a society in terms of how inactive we are and how poorly we ate and all that kind of stuff. I think, today people are actually, their attention, their radar's on, like, we should be moving more. So people are actually moving more. So I think it's a little, I'm very cautious not to say Americans are like this and the grass is greener in another part. I mean, look, if you go to the Mediterranean countries, there's plenty of unhealthy people there.
Sure.
And that's the first thing that, when I first went to Italy and Greece and I was saying, oh man, you guys are so healthy. They would say, you should see the people who have cancer. You should see the people who are smoking. You should see the people who are dying of heart disease. And so, I think that I want to make sure that we don't oversimplify, but there are important clues to actually think about it. Now, I don't know the answer of how people become more active. They may or may not be more active. And it's probably not one thing. It's a constellation of things that gives you that magic unlock to be able to live longer. The stress, the exercise, the healthy diet, the genetics, all of those things. But I think, from anybody watching or listening to this, at the end of the day, this is not, we're not teaching a course. We're not teaching a class. We're trying to hopefully in a conversation, leave people with some tickle their brain to say, you know what, I could do that. And I think that if you can actually get yourself to walk, if you're not doing more already, just from not exercising to go for a 30-minute walk as briskly as you can after dinner every single day. And if you can't go outside because it's too cold or raining, do it inside the house. Just stay in motion. And if you're like, oh, I'm going to be bored and I don't have a friend to do it with, put some earbuds in and listen to the Dhru Purohit podcast. Listen to this episode. All right. And you'll actually get it in. And just know that what you're doing is by working those muscles, you are actually releasing substances that were recently discovered that actually affect your brain and makes you more hopeful. And I think that those are the concrete types of messages that are more helpful. And I don't know how we could make Americans more active. I think actually there's a subset of Americans who are very active, And by the way, this whole 10,000 steps thing, right? Like that was sort of like the mantra. You got to work at least 10,000 steps a day if you want to be healthy. Do you know that's an urban legend?
It's an urban legend, and definitely like researchers just kind of made it up, is what I heard.
No, actually,
right?
It's a marketing company that made it up.
A step counter,
in the 1960s, a Japanese step counter, basically a pedometer company, hired an ad agency, and they created a campaign calling it 10,000 steps. It was something that, it was a jingle that worked for them. And somehow that wound up becoming embedded in the public consciousness and passed around like the old game of telephone until we started to, in the medical community, quoting it. And, in the health and wellness and fitness community, quoting in 10,000 steps. Actually, it doesn't have to be as high as 10,000. It's going to be very individualized. It's probably closer to between 5,000 and 7,000 steps to be able to be just generally healthy. But it depends on your age, depends on what else is going on in your body, right? And so this is, again, where I think The God is in the details. What we hear about and talk about. I mean, if I could make a, like an editorial comment here, because I am affected by the same thing. We live in this incredible age where we can listen to podcasts like this one and many others. We can flip on a television and scroll through a million different options. We are able to use social media and get a lot of information all the time. How do you sort through all that information? And how do you know what's misinformation? How do you know what's urban legend? I mean, I just told you that 10,000 Steps is an ad jingle from the 1960s that is still being bandied around. All right. And a lot of people believe those. All right. I think the key thing is try not to, I think, again, this is a little bit of that self-reliance. Whatever you hear, if it's interesting, to have a healthy amount of skepticism, check it out yourself. Talk to other people, and a lot of things, especially in a health and wellness community that get talked about, might not be ready for prime time, might be a great idea, but not for you. It might be an urban legend, don't eat soy because it's going to cause breast cancer. Tomatoes have lectins. You and I have talked about this before on your show. There's so many of these things out there. I kind of feel like my responsibility, and I know you've done an amazing job about this, is to have really level set conversations about what we know and what we don't know, and wherever possible, bash a myth whenever you can. I think that's what's helpful for people, especially when you talk about these aspirational areas like longevity.
Yeah, totally. And even then still, there might be things that we get wrong, especially me. I'm not a researcher. I'm not a subject matter expertise. There might be things that we over prioritize. There might be things that we under prioritize, but that's also part of the human experience of learning along the way.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of the people that I talk to, that I look up to, yourself included in that list, it's always whatever you decide to do, because there's people that are different in so many different ways. For example, you were talking about how they start off their morning in Greece and how you feel better eating lighter. I've personally found that for me also to hit some of my protein goals of being under-muscled growing up, under-eating protein as a skinny Indian vegetarian kid who didn't really know about getting all the vegetable sources of protein that were out there, I'm making up for lost time for the goals that I have. So I have a particular type of amount of protein that I'm trying to hit in the day, along with, working out and doing resistance training. And I also enjoy it. It turns my brain on. I feel good.
Get your hope molecules in there.
Get my hope molecules in there. I actually like eating, and I do well with the big breakfast. And I recognize that doesn't work for a lot of people that are out there. So there's going to be that personal experimentation.
Personalized nutrition is
the
best way to go.
And regardless of what you do, whatever you do, anything new you try, and we all like trying new things, especially if our hobby, for me, sometimes the world of health can be a little bit like a sport. I don't really watch sports, but I'm always curious about what's next. And I like to see what people are up to, and I might try something new, because every so often you come across something that makes a huge impact. But, and this is the big but, what I've learned from you and other people that I look up to is never forget about the basics. If you just nail the basics, that's going to be more than good enough for the people that are listening out there. And even if you want to try something new or take something on, don't forget about those basics.
And the basics are not difficult to do.
Yeah.
Because they bring you back to simplicity. But what it does take is being aware and being a little mindful and being very deliberate about how you live your life. I mean, I think that, you happen to if you believe that you can actually affect your own life, as opposed to being helpless and life happens to you, that overcoming that barrier is one of the first steps to getting healthy. You are happening to yourself. Life isn't happening to you. You're not a victim. You are in the driver's seat. And I think that is a simple thing that I think everyone can benefit from, especially, if you think about where we are in society today. We went through some huge historical events like the pandemic. We, are in the midst of social transformation that's happening that not comfortable for many people, myself included. We're also in the middle of a technology and a scientific revolution where we're beginning to see, new possibilities revealed, whether it's AI, whether it's gene therapy, whether it's longevity, things that are really, really exciting versus things that are very scary. Got climate change. I mean, look, all these things are happening around us. All right. But at the end of the day, no matter how overwhelmed you might be or excited or depressed you might be on these things, you still happen to yourself. And that's, I think, something that's super important for everyone to actually to take comfort in.
YouTube, if you enjoyed what you just saw, keep watching for more great content on how to improve your brain and your life.
Everyone needs to make excess body fat their business. It interferes with your health, no matter what your body size is. If you can start to address that, you're going to allow your inner hardwired metabolism to shine through.